to see you.
It's great to see you, Joey. It's been a while.
Welcome to my new channel. And I've been bugged about this for a very long time. And I said, I don't want to do a YouTube channel. And we said, what are you going to do? A conference? I don't want to be planning. And all I want to do is focus on the protests, and which I wanted to do after that very brave family in Los Angeles. And they got a couple, and they got another couple. And then there was one non-parent who joined them on December 28th of 2020. Uh-huh. And I went, I have been thinking about this since I met Erin, in like it was after Can I Get a Witness? So late August, September. And I found out she was working on this gender mapping project. And it all started to fall into place for me about protests. And you at the time with PEC, and I'd been talking to her and I thought, what a perfect marriage, because PEC at that time was looking at the broad thing of how to do stuff around America, which for anybody that doesn't live in America, a lot of times people will reach out to somebody, say in Washington State, and say, can you talk to so-and-so that's in New York? And they don't even know them. And they don't realize that's 3,000 miles away. And even though it can be cheap to jump on a plane and travel now, you know how expensive just anywhere, staying, food, lodging, ground transport, everything is crazy. So the idea of doing nationwide protests and negotiating with you at that time was just like a dream come true. Like finally, this activism that comes with a nonprofit getting into political bed with a tiny little business, because that's what Can I Get a Witness is. It's a business. It's an educational platform. And, we had some agreements and all this, and then the protests happened. Of course, there were some complications. And I think I wanted to get you to talk because of this issue that's come up a lot with organizations and transparency, and especially learning of this shocking attempt to, within a Slack group, to try to gather up people to literally silence a woman. It wasn't big tech this time. It was somebody who knows a lot about big tech, but it was so shocking. And I thought, they're always trying to throw a couple of things at us. And I know you've experienced this where somebody will say, well, I don't want to say this or that because it's infighting. And they don't understand the difference between you and I having a disagreement about something, but still that we could show up on out in the street or at the legislations or whatever and have each other's backs. And it's about the cause, ultimately. And so with that, I just wanted to ask you, and I don't know what you consider we had as infighting, and did we have this, but I'd love to hear, what your experience was with all that.
Well, first of all, this term just keeps coming to mind ever since I saw that message trying to cancel Karen, and that's a cyber lynching that they're trying to kill this woman's channel with this kind of pile-on. And no matter how many disagreements you and I have had over the years, Joey, I have never once wanted to silence you or kill your efforts or undermine what you're doing. And that's why I think this conversation is really important, because over the years, we have had some very significant disagreements. You turned out to be right. But
say it again. Say it. No.
Yeah. But what I think ultimately it comes to is that there are a lot of us in this movement who want to be nice and kind and compassionate and loving. And it has taken me a long time to get to the point where I realize that the way to be kind and compassionate and caring and loving isn't to capitulate to the demands of AGPs or to go along with people who are very concerned about the kind of language we're using. Like they don't want to use words like mutilate and mental illness when referring to children with gender dysphoria. And over the years, I think I've tended to hear those concerns and be like, oh, I don't want to hurt their feelings. Whereas you've just firmly held to truth and the need to say what is real and what is truth. And it's taken me a long time to get there. I think our first major disagreement was when you did the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. I was initially
And
really
I've never heard you talk about this. So this is,
yeah.
go ahead.
Initially, I was like, oh, mostly it was poor Scott Nugent. And that's that
Because
part.
you met her, right? You met her in
I
person.
talked to her on the phone, and
Mm.
I know her story, and I just felt bad because I feel like here is this person who's got really profound mental health issues being dragged into this. And then, it took me a while to realize, she's put herself out there. She's made her story public. The second time was in relation to the protests, and we had great success with the protests. I was so pumped, Joey. I felt so good about it. And then somebody from PEC contacted me and said, we're getting pushback about the mastectomy sign. We had
double mastectomy in Los Angeles, and that was the one place. Yeah.
And there were some, I think, detransitioners who were saying you should not be using those signs. That's really inappropriate. And of course, I went, oh, we shouldn't offend the detransitioners. We need to stop using the signs. And most of the people in PEC agreed that we should. And it's that sense of we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Since then, I've heard from people how powerful those signs are, that people who don't know what's going on, they have to have it put in their face. Otherwise, they're not going to understand that top surgery is the mutilation of a young woman's body by cutting off her breasts. And so despite the difficulty we had, I think there was a time where we weren't talking for a while. At no point did I ever feel like you were trying to undermine my efforts. And at no point was I undermining your efforts. I was still trying to find people for the protest. We're still working towards the same goal, even though we disagreed on
it was about the approach. It was a philosophical approach. And there wasn't, and I know in part of the arguments that we had about that, to get to the place where we even decided, and you had originally agreed and said, yes, okay, we agree as an organization, and with you, yes, we're going to go for it, right? That's a philosophical approach that we made that decision on. And neither of us said, this is the right approach or this is the wrong approach, because everything as we grow as a movement, which I was just talking with Jennifer Billick about, it's growing pains, and it's trying to understand, well, what works and what doesn't. And where I was coming from, a place that was so strong, was when I saw Posey Parker, all the way over there at Stonewall in London, I believe that's where Stonewall is, yes, having signs that were 3 times the size. Our duty was involved, I think, with that, Keith Jordan, and having not just a double mastectomy sign, but in color, a phalloplasty image. And I know, because I've talked about this with when Julian Vigo interviewed me, I know advertising pretty well. And I know that they were going for was shock value. And that lots of times is what needs to wake up the general public. And you do things sometimes in advertising or stories, photographs for stories in journalism, that can be quite devastating and shocking. And the thing is, like when you and I were growing up, we didn't flip a magazine page and then have like a page that comes up that says trigger warning ahead, and then turn the page and it says, in the next few pages, you're going to see some really intense photos. It's like we grew up tougher, and you grew up more with a forcefulness around thinking critically about things and being able to deal with the impact of something that would crush your heart in the moment, not fall into a puddle and say, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. Let's sue them. Let's dox them. Let's cancel them.
Well, and that's something that's happening now. And I feel like it's so sad. There has been a conversation that Karen Davis started that I think is really important about accepting the idea that there are true trans, or that there are some people who we should be I'm not even sure what the word is, but we should be honoring their AGP-ness or honoring their desire to be.
Penis. Wait a minute, you just said AG penis.
Seems really
And I
wrong.
got to correct you. I got to challenge you rather than correct you. You said Karen Davis started it. I would say, I mean, remember,
Well,
Karen's only been doing this for a year.
No, but this
Posey
huge
started
blow
it
up.
too.
Yeah,
Yes.
this huge blow up. Because
Yes,
I think
recently.
you and Jennifer Balick were among the very first who started to say,
And Julia Long.
yeah, we need to push back on this whole narrative that men can be women. And, it doesn't matter how kind and nice and gentle they are, men shouldn't be in women's bathrooms. We shouldn't be forced to use pronouns. But Karen's come out very strongly and critically about people who are doing that. And it makes me really sad that that's seen as something dangerous and offensive and dividing and infighting. Because the only way we learn and grow is by having these kind of intense discussions. And especially the discussion that was happening on the Pet Substack. For people who don't know what that is, it was a blog. And boy, there was some really good discussion going on about it.
A particular article called It's Strategy, People.
Right. And we were arguing and pushing back because this article suggested that we shouldn't call these kids mentally ill, that we shouldn't talk about body mutilation, that we shouldn't call someone who's trans identified by the wrong pronouns. I mean, it really was suggesting we need to have this strategy in order for mainstream media to embrace what we're saying. And a number of us were saying, no, we need to uphold truth. And, if we can't talk about this as a mental illness, we're stigmatizing mental illness. We're basically saying that mental illness is so bad that we have to pretend like this isn't a mental illness,
right?
In order to talk about it. And we need to pretend like there is such a thing as true trans because we don't want to offend anybody. And the discussion that ensued was powerful and interesting and revealed some very disturbing things. I think some really, I don't know if it was unconscious racism or what, but there was some of that came out that that it really was fascinating. And it was so sad to me when that was all taken down, when they decided that this was too hot to handle, I guess, because one of the ways that I've learned is by reading these kinds of discussions, by engaging in these kinds of debates. They're really powerful.
Well, it's like what you and I had, right? I mean, like you said, there was a heated thing back and forth about this.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I just
remember we had a discussion about Scott Nugent. It must have lasted 2 hours where we were just, and I was saying, no, gender dysphoria is a real thing. I had it. I know how awful it is. I don't want to hurt his feelings because I was very, that's where I was. Thanks to, and I've revisited that conversation a lot. And now I'm to the point where I call Scott Nugent her. And I try to call her Kelly King because I believe that's her name. And that's it. That's been some important growth. I'm not saying I'm 100% right or that you're 100% right, though I think you are. But I believe that these kinds of intense discussions are valuable. And it's so unfortunate that someone who is prominent in GenSpect is so threatened by this kind of discussion that he wanted to kill Karen's station, kill her YouTube channel. To me, that is just as bad as what the trans rights activists are doing. When we try and shut down someone who's raising uncomfortable points or questions that we are not willing to answer or respond to, especially when it comes to this issue where we have a whole bunch of therapists who have kind of come together, who are promoting therapy as the appropriate response to somebody who's, a child who's announced a transgender identity. That's an organization that deserves to have some scrutiny.
This thing about the Pitt article too, and I've said this before, I mean, the Pitt Substack, it's in if nobody knows, I mean, Substack is a platform, anybody can create an account and do that. And I talked to one of the originators of that. And, she convinced me that they were going to be launching this thing. And I thought it was wonderful because people on the outside that don't understand, if you haven't been working with parents or you don't know the struggles that parents go through, where even if they don't start affirming their child, that they realize that the school is doing it, the neighbors are doing it, the other relatives are everybody's doing it. But them, it's horrendous, and they don't have support from any place. So they need to be able to have support groups. And because most of them have jobs that they have to protect, that they can't talk about stuff in their real names. So this idea of pit Substack, you know, I would argue with anybody that says, which I got an email about this, they said all their articles are the same. And I said, no, they're not. You're seeing patterns of things that you might think you read something about the 16-year-old daughter of somebody and find out somebody else writes a story about their 16-year-old or 17-year-old son. And then 3 articles later, there's a very similar thing. This has been going on for, you know, a year now. This stuff is very rich and it's very real. And I don't have anything about people not being able, you know, having to post anonymously or use pseudonyms or whatever. I mean, that's never been an issue for me. But with this particular one and that article that came out, it was not one of those normal stories. This was as if Coca-Cola purchased, purchased an ad in a magazine or something that was supposed to be about health food.
Right.
And they just,
it almost seems like Jen Specht, you know, got in touch with the pit parent and said, you're going to put this in, you're going to write an article to defend us because we're really uncomfortable with the kinds of scrutiny that's being raised. And it had nothing to do, I mean, it really, like you said, I am so appreciative of the pit Substack. I share their stories. I think it's incredibly valuable. And it, like you said, one of these things doesn't fit. Its strategy people did not fit with that Substack. It was very different, and it was defensive and accusatory, and it really, I feel really sad because I feel like it undermined all of the other incredibly important stories that have been shared. And I hope that they'll regroup and continue to share their really important stories, because like you said, so many people can't speak out about what's happening because they'll get attacked, they'll get bullied, they'll lose their job, they might lose their marriage, they might lose their child, they might have CPS called on them. And so they need a way to get those stories out there. And that's how this has been a very powerful venue. But again, I think that analogy, it was like Coca-Cola having an ad in a health food magazine. It was very jarring how it didn't fit in, and how it was almost attacking anybody who didn't ascribe to their ideas about how things should be done.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what they call that in the television world? It's called jumping the shark. When you're going along with a particular narrative, and this comes from the show Happy Days a long time ago.
Fonzie.
You're going along with a storyline, and you're kind of going with that, and it's a series, and then you come back and everybody loves this series, and you're very familiar with the characters and everything, and there's a certain thing going on, and then all of a sudden it's like the writers got desperate, or they were told by the showrunner or the producer or whatever, and said,
advertisers,
why don't you throw an elephant out there in the plot? All of a sudden you go, what? And that's what happened to this. So it's called jumping the shark, because they actually used a shark with a character in that thing. And that's what it was like to me. That article absolutely jumped the shark. And I went, oh no, now it's becoming propaganda. Now it's actually taking voices away from the parents. But what happened with that, and then Jennifer Billick wrote a subsequent article actually questioning, because the way that there were very few voices that came in there that were screaming and yelling, and they all used the same words, like, you guys are in a purity spiral, and all this, and on and on and on. And then she was getting attacked. And I've talked to some parents that said she was cruel. Jennifer's article was cruel. And
really?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, and that's the other interesting thing is that I started getting messages from parents saying Karen Davis is attacking parents, and I was like, what? And I went I watched her videos, and I didn't see her attacking parents. I was so confused at how this narrative came out. And then I got told, you're trying to bring down Jen Specht. And I'm like, what? I mean, it was just very weird how this went from sort of people having opinions about things and people asking questions. And many of the questions that Karen raised, I had in the past about,
Right.
some of it's not like she planted those in my brain. I had discussions with people about exactly some of the things that she has brought up. And yet all of a sudden, parents who I have had good relationships with in the past, people who, have seen me as someone who's at the forefront fighting this battle, have accused me of trying to undermine parents or blaming parents or attacking parents. And that makes me really, really sad, because that is, if anything, what I'm hoping to do is say, no, parents, preserve that beautiful space in the Pit Substack that you had, and don't let it be sullied by, by going after Karen Davis or anybody else who has concerns or questions.
Don't look at a possible NGO here who's ready to do a corporate takeover of a cause. And that's what Jennifer was really getting to is, there should be no fear. If your house is clean,
right?
Why are you running around trying to do things like this? Then it makes it even more sketchy, right?
And that's when people get that defensive, it makes me wonder. I'm like, well, what is it that you're, because I've worked for a couple organizations, and we're very clear when we get donations, we post about what what those donations are going for. Right now, with Advocates Protecting Children, and we don't get a lot of donations. Most of the money that we have is from book sales, and all of that goes right back into our organization. And we use it to send out materials, educational materials, which costs a lot of money. But we, just recently sent a book, a resource pack to every legislator who was on the committee to hear the SAFE Act in Ohio. That's something that, if somebody wants to look at our books, we're, come on over. We'll show you exactly what we're doing. The fact that they're so defensive is concerning to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so much stuff about that. But going back to the pit, you and I had a very interesting, I had this thing happen, and I shared it with you. And that is that after they shut down the discussions completely, and there were about 300 comments in there, and Jennifer wrote her article because she went back, as she says, to reflect on all that and saw that it was wiped out. And then, I was just like, oh, geez, well, of course, it's not going to stop me from reading I have read every single, I think I might have missed maybe 2 articles, and it's been coming out, I think yesterday they had like 3 come out. Sometimes they'll have 1, sometimes 2 or 3 in a day. And this is what's so scary. And it's a good thing that we're seeing more people waking up, because there are more stories, and we see that people are understanding this. But there was a really nice article that came out, I want to say now, was it yesterday or the day before, with a mom who talked about always telling the truth to her son and all that. And there was an article that somebody else wrote before that was about the Time magazine article that came out that was so sappy. And it was a parent that was, angry about how Time magazine made this doctor at Seattle Children's Hospital seem like a victim. And why? Because of the protesters, as if the protesters were these big scary monsters who were going to stop all this stuff. And I saw this and I'm going, those are protests that I orchestrated, that I know my people up in Washington, right? They did a fantastic job in September and October of 2021. And this is what was in the article. So I read the pit thing with this woman where she's yelling at Time magazine, and just, it was great. Every point was like, I knew she was really upset about it. And the protests kept coming up, So I decided I hadn't written anything since that whole thing shut down. I was on my phone, and I was writing out a very thoughtful, I thought, overview coming out as the orchestrator of these protests and some of the stuff. And I started to reveal a story that I've never talked about. I have to find out about all the legalities of this and everything. But I had a young single mom who herself has admitted that if she was a young kid today, and she's got a daughter, she said she herself, she was a tomboy, she probably would have done the same thing. So there she is at the protest, and she's got a body cam on her. And while 99% of the interactions have been great at all the protests that went on last year, the thumbs up, and the worst things we get are mostly young women who are virtue signaling, like this, or yelling transphobe and bigot.
Or who think that you're anti-LGBT.
Oh, homophobe. That got screamed in LA.
Which is just ironic, because
Absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, she caught, on camera, this woman came out of nowhere off of the sidewalk and started yelling at everybody, telling them that they were going to be destroying the future of her trans child's health. And it turned out to be, once they started engaging, and this young woman is there, talking to her, you find out that this woman has got a 7-year-old son that she's turning into a girl. And everybody's mortified. And this young mom that was protesting, she's not as seasoned as some of the other ones that were there. I mean, she knew the rules that I put out and all that. And then, you're in the midst because you've been around stuff like that. And, things can change and you have to be very on. She started engaging a little bit too much with this woman, a heated verbal thing. And one of the other more seasoned protesters, you could argue, was it too soon or too late that not too late, too soon that she sort of tugged her away from that and said, look, let's put our time where it's better spent. This woman is, this is not happening here. And, that was all caught on camera. And if for anybody that doesn't understand the mindset, if you've never seen I Am Jazz or any of this stuff, and you think, how could a parent decide that literally putting their 7-year-old on puberty blockers and they can't wait?
Inducing a developmental delay in a child.
Purposefully.
Yeah.
For what? So anyway, this stuff is there, right? So this letter in Pitt, this woman is saying, all this stuff, do you realize, Time Magazine, and this and this and this. So I'm typing this thing out on my phone and talking about the woman caught on the camcorder, how important and how fantastic these protests have been. And basically I'm always trying to urge people to think about becoming active somehow, even if not in a protest, get active rather than, thinking that you have no power. Mm-hmm. And then, so I finish, I check all my spelling, I go to post, and I'm going to do a screen share right now. I go to post and I burst out laughing.
100 years from now.
That was my last paragraph there, where I literally ended the thing with, this fight is all about as many gains as we can make. I clicked that little post thing and that's what I got. So I did I contacted you. I asked you to see if you could get in there and post something, if you'd get the same thing, right? But what did you find when you went to post something? You were able to post?
I was able to post, but then I went today and my subscription.
Oh, wait. We're not done with that part.
Yeah. So I posted.
What you did after you posted a very short sentence,
and it worked. And so then I posted your comments, and they got a lot of likes.
You asked me to send you my comment, which you didn't even know. I just said, I wrote this thing, and you said, send it to me.
Yeah, I'll post it.
And you did. Yeah. And then what happened?
And then my subscription was taken away.
And within 3 hours,
they
turned off the comments and they removed everything that was there.
But they're back up.
Yes. So
I think maybe there's some conflict within those who are running it to try and figure out where they want to fall on all this.
I don't know, but the person that I originally used to tweet every time that she would send me stuff, and I would tweet it, and then I initially talked with her even about GenSpect, and we had difference of opinion about that. I said, I'll support this for now, but I've got my eyes, and this is from last year. I contacted her in an email. I said, dear so-and-so, do you have any knowledge about why they have banned me from this? It took her a couple of days. She said, I have no idea. I've been gone. I have no idea. So that's the answer that I got back. But so you got unsubscribed.
Yeah.
And hang on. I asked Karen Davis.
Yeah. Oh.
Could you see and go to this specific
Does
article?
she have to wait 100 years too?
Yes. And she got the same thing I did.
No, and I'm laughing, but it really is very sad because
incredibly frightening.
Really rich conversations. And you, Joey, have been such an advocate for the parents. When I think of who's been out on the front lines advocating for parents, it's you. I mean, you have been out there.
Thank you.
So it's shocking to me that they would block you like this. And it's really sad when discussions get get clamped down. And I occasionally will block someone on my Facebook or my Twitter, very, very rarely on YouTube. But that's when somebody's making personal attacks on me, or when I'm afraid they're going to try and dogpile on me, mass report me, and get my stuff taken down. Those are the only two times. If somebody's just posting something I'm not particularly happy about, I let it stand, because I think these are important conversations. They're important voices, and we need to be having these discussions. We need to be allowed to push back on certain organizations or certain groups. And if we can't, if we are, I mean, when I think of all the horrible material that's out there that Angus Fox could have tried to have removed, and the fact that he went after Karen Davis, to me, that's
a lot of different implications, doesn't it?
It's really disturbing. It's really disturbing. First of all, she must be asking questions that are making them very uncomfortable, because typically when somebody asks me a question that I think is absurd, I tend to ignore it. I just don't, I'm like, yeah, I don't engage. Or I'll give, some kind of a response. If somebody pushes me, I'll try and give a response. In this case, it's almost been like, no, you're not allowed to ask that. We will not acknowledge that this is a reasonable question. And maybe what she's asking is absurd to some people, but I think to a lot of us, her questions are concerning. How closely related are the Gen Spect people to pedophile and AGP apologists? That's important. Why does an organization that's fighting against transing kids embrace trans identified adults? That's confusing. As a kid who had gender dysphoria, if I was looking at the Gen Spect page, I would be thinking, well, look, they've got women who have transitioned, so it must be okay. I want to be like, Erin Kimberly. I want to be like,
that just happened in email I got from a parent.
Yeah, I mean, so they're modeling, and they had Deb Hayton. I don't know if I believe that Deb Hayton was on one of their advisory boards or something for a while. I don't know.
You're calling him Dave Hayton? Is that what you said?
Dave? Is it Deb?
No. Well, he goes by Debbie Hayton. He was David Hayton. Yeah, I thought all of a sudden that's not misgendering or anything. It's like just misnaming somebody. It's pretty funny. You got very friendly there, Dave. Oh, let's
friendly.
Dave Hayton.
Yeah, we've been sharing the bathroom and we've gotten very close.
Yeah.
No, but I think that, those are questions that are reasonable. The thing that raised my concerns about Gen Spect's page is this kind of pronouncement about transphobia that they had. And this is something that I've discussed with a number of different people. And some people have just said, oh, Erin, you're being silly. They just mean people who want to, kill trans identified people. And I'm like,
Do you know anybody that wants to go?
I don't know anybody who wants to do that. So I'm confused. And am I a transphobe? And what's the difference of trans? How are they defining it? And why are they even putting that on there? And I have come to the conclusion that I think they're doing it because they're like I was 2 years ago. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want anybody to feel bad. I'm just going to be kind and compassionate. But in the long run, we cannot accept the gender ideology in any way, or it's not going to go away. We cannot partially fight this. We can't say, well, you can cut off my fingers, but please leave my arm. This is an industry that is systematically trying to eliminate women, erase our rights and protections. They're going after our children. They are completely undermining society's reality. We can't just kind of fight this. We can't just be nice and win this battle. We have to take a hard line. This is my belief. I am still going to work with people who don't adhere to the same beliefs as I do. I'm still going to, if I feel like they're doing good work and making a difference, I'm not going to.
We're both currently doing that, aren't we? With people that, want to defend some of this stuff, because whatever project we're working on, we can manage somehow to figure out and make compromise.
Right.
That's what I've been doing.
but ultimately it's reasonable to ask those questions. When the gender giraffe came out,
Mm.
it was very interesting. I'm friends with someone who's here in Utah, and she posted the gender giraffe that GenSpect put out and said, oh my gosh, look at what they're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
She had no idea it was put out by GenSpect. She thought it was put out by trans rights activists.
Yep.
She thought it was like the next iteration of the genderbread person.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that somebody couldn't tell that that was supposed to be sort of a move in the right direction is an indication that maybe it didn't hit home. And we should be able to say, maybe you might want to work on that a little bit more. It didn't quite hit home. But when somebody started to raise that question in a discussion, they were accused of trying to undermine GenSpect. So it's almost like, GenSpect might have like a shirt with a spill on it, and you're not allowed to say, hey, I think maybe, do you want to look at your shirt? It might have a spill on it. You're not allowed to even do that. You're not allowed to, and that's unfortunate because we grow when we're challenged. We grow when we have to think about why we're doing certain things. And I am certainly grateful, Joey, that you cared enough about me to engage me in the difficult discussions so that I could get to the point where I understood how big this battle is and how important it is to be fighting it on all fronts.
And we had yelling matches. I blocked you for a good while on Facebook, right? And that thing of being nice, as you said, like when you went back and looked at, and what was happening was too, that people rely too much. You're getting contacted by your colleagues at that point in PEC saying, hey, we're upsetting the detransitioners. I was watching that. There was one detransitioner who decided that, and I always want to say there's a detransitioner of the moment, and it's somebody who's gotten popular and they've started having followers on Twitter. And then all of a sudden they're the ones that are the voices for everybody. Meanwhile, which I hadn't even told you about, because there are people that probably for you too, Erin, that I probably won't ever talk about. I mean, the secrets are that deep that I hold for some people. I have a detransitioner in Canada who, a lot like Kira Bell, Black, she's older, 38 years old. She, 10 years before in Canada, had her breasts cut off because she thought, and like me, she was a lesbian, very butch, and very much thinking the only way she was going to get paid attention to or have any respect in life was if she sort of passed as a man. She said to me, when those things started coming out on Twitter, and she hadn't even been on Twitter, she decided to join it afterwards. She saw that, she was so pissed off. She said, some of these detransitioners have issues they haven't dealt with, and I see them being bullies online. And that's what she thought about the thing that happened with you. And she said, Joey, if anybody in Canada had been protesting at the clinic where I had my breast removed, I never would, and she said, I never would have had my tits cut off.
Right.
So I saw somebody marching with that sign. So again, it's not that that we can say it's 100% you should always do this. And thank you so much for even having the faith at that point. This is March of last year in 2021. When the protests happened, and we've got the PEC banners connected to the images that we took a lot of time also, remember, with the messaging, because the boards are expensive. Everything about putting on something like that, you got a banner and the boards and whistles and bullhorns, and all of a sudden, you've got some money that's added up here. Each protest to start one like that is around $500. Okay, just letting people know when you're thinking about stuff like that, if you're going to do it in a good way. And it had taken a very long time, weeks, to build up to having a Twitter army, because we knew that we weren't going to get, cameras right away from MSNBC, even Fox or anybody else. We had to do our own publicity all the time with that. So, you took a big risk as an organization, as an individual. And this thing, and I appreciate you thanking me about that, because I'm not a mother. But one of the things that I think you saw go on also in that discussion, when the attacks started happening at the few of us that were really challenging and trying to be thoughtful, and were there some snarky comments? Yeah, there was. There was emotional stuff that went back and forth, but it wasn't, so horrible, again, to eliminate. But the idea that any of the women that were objecting were not parents. That was an assumption that was made. The other thing was that nobody in there objecting actually had started any other organization that was like what GenSpec was doing. And it was such a wonderful thing to see. Alex Erin came in and said, hello. Yes, there have been other organizations, several, and something that it didn't get written in there, but I thought, what happened to the Kelsey Coalition, right? Which has been long defunct, but that was the first one that I heard of.
Yeah.
And even
Hands across the aisle.
And even
there
if there are flaws,
yeah,
even if there are flaws in
Yeah.
different, these are attempted things that actually started to gather and support parents that had nothing. So GenSpec hasn't come out of the, for nothing. And as I keep going back, Keith Jordan, in answering me in that, and you can see all of this. I encourage anybody, I'll probably put it in the description again to go back because we're talking about this. The article that Jennifer wrote about this at the very end is a Google Doc. Anybody can click on, and you see archived all the stuff that they threw away, that they deleted. Keith Jordan is the man who runs Our Duty in England. And whatever the content, was, he had thrown something out. I threw something back, and then he answered me. And in his answer, I thought, oh, Stella's not going to like this. And why? Because he said, well, I think it's no secret, and I'm not saying everything verbatim. I think it's no secret that GenSpec was supposed to be an umbrella organization for all these other organizations, Transgender Trend, Our Duty. I don't even know if PEC was involved in that originally, but all kinds of organizations were supposed to be able to start sharing resources and really go for the needs and make sure that happened. And he said, and that didn't happen. Right. And quite frankly, in his opinion, it wasn't doing, but it's grown fast. And what do we do now? And there's the thing right there. And that's when they shut that thing off. Yeah. His comment and one other, and very shortly after, it all disappeared.
And that's what is confusing for me to be accused of, malicious intention towards an organization when I am actively and have historically shared their resources. It's incredibly confusing. One of the things, even when we were so mad at each other, we weren't undermining each other. I might not have agreed with you 100%, but I'd still share stuff that you were doing because I respect what you're doing. I respect the resources that GenSpec has come up with. They have some phenomenally good resources on their site.
Because you have so many volunteers. Yeah. Volunteers that have become kind of activists, right? And parents that have gone like, what can I do? What can I offer? Yeah. All these people doing unpaid work. I will say that. Yeah.
But the irony is that as I'm seeing all these organizations actively sharing their resources, I'm not seeing the reciprocal.
Isn't that interesting?
And so that's one of the things that first made me kind of confused is Maria Kuffler is the only person who's written a book for parents, Detox, DETRANS, DESIST. Incredibly powerful book. Parents have reached out to her and said, you've saved my child's life. And for some reason, it wasn't listed as a resource. I believe somebody from PEC reached out to them and said, would you mind listing this? And it never was listed. And that's unfortunate because it's as far as I know, the only book of its type. And so that's where it starts to be problematic when people are accused of, it's sort of like you have to 100% defend this one particular organization. It's the queen bee of the organizations. And if you do anything to even question it, then you're accused of almost like, what is it when you're, I can't remember the word, blaspheme. It's blaspheme.
We get back to religious language too.
It's almost like it feels very cult-like, like you have to adhere 100% to this, to this organization. You have to pledge yourself. And if you question, then you're a blasphemer. And it makes me really sad because I feel very strongly that I want to support parents. I want to support detransitioners. I want this transgender industry needs to be gone. It's absurd. As Jennifer and you were talking about, this whole thing is absurd. There are men and there are women, and that's it. And if a man wants to wear a dress, more power to him. He's still a man. And the fact that this, I mean, it's almost like this ideology has gotten so entrenched that people don't even know that they have been influenced by it. And I think that's where a lot of these parents are, that it's almost like they've been steeped in it. And so they know what the issue is for them, but they're not seeing the, you know, how it reminds me a lot of this legislation in Utah. There was an effort to block males from competing as females and vice versa. And now we have a new compromise legislation that will allow.
It sounds scary.
I know.
What's the compromise?
Compromise is that the state of Utah will have a commission to decide which boys can impersonate girls and vice versa.
Oh my God. So they're looking at who's going to do a better job of taking on secondary sex characters.
And what that does to me is it says now the state is giving tacit approval to the concept that a boy can become a girl and a girl can become a boy. This is not compromise legislation. And the fact that we have a huge number of parent groups, conservative Utah, you know, LDS conservative Mormon parent groups who are excited about this legislation because they see it as a good compromise. That's where we are, that it's sort of like we're so covered with the muck that we're so happy to just wash our hands. We don't realize we're still covered completely in mud.
That's how you're genspect. I mean, in terms of analogy, where you're saying that, you know, they're saying this and that we want to get rid of this thing. But meanwhile, something that you said, Erin, this thing about another conversation that you and I had last year, but we still didn't make up at this point, but I got your, you know, we had these exchanges. One of the things that really concerns me, it's not just genspect. This goes on in culture all the time. We are looking forever for idols, for turning people into celebrities, for being our saviors, for being the ones that are going to lead us in a particular direction. So that I think it's laziness. I think that there's a lot of insecurity and a lack of confidence in people. They go, well, I can come up with ideas, but I'm not a leader. Like, and it's true. I mean, there are people that have more leadership skills. They also have been given access to learn how to be leaders, to even think about having that kind of confidence.
And they're also in a position where they can be, like you and I have the privilege to be public. We have decided, you know, I've sacrificed that, you know, I realize I'm not going to be able to go back into academia. I burned that bridge. I burned a bunch of bridges with friends, burned a bunch of bridges with relatives, because I feel like this battle is so important that I'm willing to make those sacrifices. Not everybody can do that.
Right.
If I had little kids at home, I wouldn't be doing this. I would, you know, but because I'm in a position where if I'm arrested, like Jennifer Swain was in the UK, I'm fully prepared for that. There are a lot of people who aren't in that position. So those of us who can speak out are, I think, oftentimes put on pedestals, or there are expectations put on us that are unreasonable. And Joey, when I was in high school, I was not popular because I did not understand, you know, I was the kid sitting under a tree reading a book. I wasn't the kid, you know, my social skills have never been particularly good. I don't know how to navigate these you know,
nuances and stuff.
Yeah. And so I tend to, you know, if somebody's mad at me, I tend to just be like, fine, walk away. You know, so if somebody starts calling me names, I'm like, okay, you don't like me. That's all right. I'm moving on. But I think that there are personalities in this movement who are really good at those social interactions and at cultivating followers and at encouraging loyalty. And I think that's really not particularly good for this kind of a movement.
Well, in any movement, we need people that can certainly, you know, be able to put their message out, period. Okay. If we look back, and I know something you and I share in common is our desire to have seen Barack Obama become president. You know, we all think that we made that happen. I just look now and go, I don't have any Pritzker money. But anyway, all that aside, this idea of cult of personality. I've been chasing this for about a year because, as you well know, last year with the women's picket DC, and I ended up writing an article about this that right now, Uncommon Ground Media, which is a fantastic publication out of the UK, but every article that was printed in 2021 right now is sitting on, they haven't been able to retrieve them. They're going to come back. It has something to do with digital, some digital mess. But anyway, I wrote an article about that, and it was called How Betrayal and Shame Keep Holding the Women's Movement Back. Now, you were still with, this time last year, you were still with PEC. PEC had done a donation to this thing.
I had done a donation, and I was under the impression that my donation was going to be used as a scholarship for a woman who needed help to get there. I couldn't afford to go. I was hoping my donation would help somebody else go. I don't think that's what it was used for. I haven't talked
there was one woman that set up this coalition, she called it. It never became a nonprofit, never became any other official group or anything, just a coalition of women. We who do grassroots understand how that stuff happens. But as soon as money is involved, the moment you start asking for money, you're not going to be a coalition anymore. You really need to, you can still operate as a coalition and as a collective or whatever, but you need to be able to be accountable for cash. And this crowdfunder raised over $30,000. It was supposed to do things. So you were one of over like 342. I think there were only 2 or 3 men that donated to that. And I know because I studied this, I was just really entrenched in this. The moment that this thing started looking wonky, I went, this is it. I dropped everything else. I dropped a couple of articles I was working on, everything to start tracking the personalities. And one thing was that the woman that started that, she had her own cult of personality that was created. And women just trusted her. And they wanted to give money to her because she did all these YouTubes using a couple of other women who also had a little cult of personality that was starting to come up around them. They had a certain amount of integrity, not known for any, and still to this day, not known for any financial scandals. And they were not at that time. But the thing was, they raised all that money. And it didn't, and they never said, except in videos, oh, we're going to need this much money for that and this much money for that and everything. The money poured in, the event happens, and it's completely wonky. Okay, the person that started this whole thing basically kind of hid up in a room. I'm telling you, I interviewed over 26 women on this thing. But in the end, all this money is there. And everything that I could gather information on, and I couldn't name anybody because still, this is back to this cult of personality and what's going on with GenSpect, is that you have a number of women, a very small number of women that could have come out and said, look, this is my name and this is what I saw. And we cannot have anything like this happen again, because it was all about trust and faith and celebrity and girl fanning and just trust. And yes, we're all on the same page and all of that and all this money. And in the end, the actual event could not have cost barely, if it was 10,000, maybe a tiny bit over 10,000 is what everybody can figure. This is not just me pulling this out of my ass, which means almost $20,000 still to this day ended up in that woman's pocket. And maybe from what she said, ended up in somebody else's pocket as well. And then what happened after that was a series of the women that were devastated by this. Through a series of emails, there were like 50 women involved in these emails, and it dwindled down to about 30 pretty quickly. About 20 dropped off because there was another little group that started, another little gang that said, let's create a new coalition. And what was their main goal? To go after that money.
Right.
And I started saying in the emails, you're going to be the third thief if this happens. This is crazy. But the thing is that even till today, the names of the women that I got quotes from and everything on that refuse to talk about what happened. Again, how can we grow this was about the women's movement, because they were going after, the Equality Act and what Biden had signed. Any movement, if you don't have people willing to say, hey, Erin, didn't we get that donation for $5,000? And what happened with that? I never saw it. And you go, oh, don't you remember? We spent it on a billboard and this and that. And I go, do you have any paperwork on it? And you know what? My dog ate it. I mean, That is what we're,
Or,
that's what we're
or
looking at.
how dare you ask me that? How dare you? You're trying to bring me down. You're trying to destroy me. How dare you?
And then I do, and I go, you know what? And I'm going to tell you now, I have those other emails from you about how you yelled about somebody and you said names about them and stuff. You know, I'm going to publish all that stuff. And I know where you live. And now when you really get down and dirty, I know where you live, and I'm going to publish it and, you know, whatever. I mean, there's the quickness and there's the craziness. I mean,
And that's something that I respect about you again, is that even when we were not agreeing, well, I never felt like you were going to do something to harm me or to undermine me.
No, and you know, behind the scenes, I mean, there were a couple of women that we certainly had discussions, and I was like really not happy about Erin and how she treated me or this or that. I mean, that went on, and we've talked about that. I don't have anything at this point to hide from you. If somebody were to come forward and say, well, Erin, you know what Joey said, blah, 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 and here's the email I saw or something.
And that would be fine.
It's not a surprise. It's not
right. We all do and say things when we're upset and angry. And I think that that's where maybe social media makes it very difficult. That they, you know, someone can screenshot. Somebody recently just sent me a screenshot of someone who I considered to be a friend at one point, to show, you know, how much this particular person is undermining me in a fairly large group. And I'm like, you know,
at some point, right? You just got to go.
I mean, and maybe we need to, I mean, and some people have accused me and said, well, you're doing exactly what you're upset about by sharing what Angus did. And I guess that what I see is something very different, is that there's a big difference between, you know, being upset and angry and having these, you know, interpersonal disputes is what I would consider them, versus, you know, if I got on a channel and said, you know, I am angry at Joe Blow because Joe Blow keeps saying that, you know, I'm pocketing a bunch of money from, donations that have been made to this other organization. So I want you to, or better yet, cancel me because I'm asking about Joe Blow's organization. That's really different than interpersonal disputes. And I understand that people are going to be mad at me. There are going to be people that hate me. There are going to be people that think I'm awful. I can't really do anything about that. That's an interpersonal thing. But when somebody, I go back to that term, engages in what looks like an electronic lynching of a woman who is just bringing up concerns, you know, to me, that is ugly. That's, you know, trying to deplatform, silence her. And that's where it gets to be really scary, when somebody starts, and that's what we're all vulnerable to, is that kind of mass attack. At any point, any of us who are public can be piled on like that. And there have been a few times where I have been, and it's a really bad feeling when suddenly you realize that, you know, 200 people have just reported your account because you said something they didn't like.
I want to address the language too that you just used. And here again, is it right? Is it wrong? Whatever. But this thing around, you and I both broached this, the racism that came up around that discussion in there, and to use a phrase like cyber lynching, I'll tell you why I even used it at all, because I happened to see a private email that somebody sent to somebody saying this is what they were going to do to Karen. As a Black woman living in America, a woman who's a teacher, a woman who is a woman of experience, life experience. We're not talking about some 27-year-old.
She's brilliant.
But here's the thing. She's not ignorant, obviously, of the kinds of language that people might use for anything like this. And we've talked anything about this being a digital takedown. You know, I talked with Jennifer yesterday about us living in a digital society where we think that we can just text something or type something to somebody or whatever, and no one's going to find out about it. Or you think you put something on private, or you're in a private Slack group. The language and the vitriol that started, that I saw that was happening, is just like what you said. I doubt, again, bringing back, Jennifer said something. Can you imagine if we weren't talking about Karen Davis and it was Benjamin Boyce? Do you think people would have said the things that they did? Hell no.
The kinds of criticisms that Karen is getting. People say she's shrill. She's
Shouty.
mean. She's
Yeah.
shouty. They're not addressing what the concerns that she's bringing up. They're addressing her as a person.
Noise, right? It's all the distraction.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't listen to what she's asking.
Right.
Noise. Let's call her names.
And some of the comments in the discussion on the Pitt article, I just went, oh goodness, people either are overtly racist or they have no clue that they're racist. And I'm not sure which is worse, but I really believe that a lot of this is, we know that the vast majority of parents who are, whose kids are taking on a transgender identity are white, middle class, mostly educated. I mean, that's the demographic that's being hit really hard by this. And I almost have this sense that there's some race that they may not even realize it, but that it's coming out. And it really, that's why I felt the need to expose what Angus wrote. And that's primarily it. I think if I had gotten that kind of if somebody had written that about Benjamin Boyce, I probably wouldn't have felt compelled, because I think that the motivation for doing it would have been really different.
See, now that's where I differ with you. That's really interesting. And I wonder, this is a conversation maybe you and I'll have more. If somebody had gone after Benjamin Boyce like that, I would have equally been really pissed off and said,
I would have been really
behind this and why?
Well, and part of it would be the motivation. Why are they going after him? What is he done?
It's like what happened on Twitter when he did, when he did the horrible thing that he did. And for me, I had the same reaction that Karen does. I'm like, I saw his stuff and went, keep tweeting, keep writing your stuff.
I don't follow him carefully enough to have a sense of that. But I guess maybe I would. I mean, in that email that message, the Slack message that was sent out, I think maybe it was the way in which it was done too. It wasn't just like, hey, I'm really sick of Karen. Let's stop let's stop talking about her. No, it was there was a link to her YouTube channel with very specific instructions about how to get her deplatformed. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll have to think about how, but my response was very protective.
That's it, Erin.
My response was very protective. It was very much like, this is what the trans rights activists are trying to do. And maybe it's because Benjamin's channel is different. He's not specific, he does talk a lot about transgender issues, but he's got a whole lot of other stuff.
I think he's made it gender. He's made it his entire shtick,
it wouldn't feel like as much of a targeted, we're going to bring down the enemy, which is what this felt like. And it is freedom. I mean, to me, freedom of speech, the fact that I used to support the ACLU, I used to donate to them, and they were the ones who were saying, the KKK has the right to say what they're saying, even though it's reprehensible and disgusting. They have a right to say it. And that's where I'm at. I don't agree with the TRAs, but I'm not going to shut them down. I'm going to counter what they say. But when we start talking about people don't have the right to talk about what they're talking about, that you can't stray from the narrative that we've established. That's really scary. I mean, that's when we start getting into, it's the slippery slope that, quickly goes into a cliff that we fall off. And we've seen instances where people's voices have been silenced and nobody's been willing to stand up and say, that's not okay. And I don't want to be 10 years down the line, be one of those people who says, wow, I should have said something. If we have, it's possible that we will be in a terrible totalitarian state where women have no rights and protections. But at least I can look my daughter in the eye and say, I tried.
Yeah. This thing about free speech, it isn't going back. So I want to ask you a question. When Trump got canceled off of Twitter, what did you feel like?
Yeah. And that's interesting, because that was when I was still in that, Trump derangement. Oh my gosh, the world is coming to an end. Trump got elected.
But when he got canceled,
on Twitter, that's when I started to think, this is maybe scary. This is
why?
Scary, because we're silencing a voice we don't like. And who is it who's deciding what voices we can hear and what voices we can't hear? And this brings me to Joe Rogan and how ironic it is that the very people, you know, all these hipniks that I used to listen to their music, who were rallying against the government, who were fighting for the rights of the people, are now comfortable deplatforming someone because they don't like what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
That scares the crap out of me, Joey.
Mm-hmm.
That means that these people who used to know that you couldn't trust big pharma, you couldn't trust big government, you couldn't trust the big business, they're now like, oh yeah, we're going to support the deplatforming of people we don't like. What happened? How did we get there? How did we get there, Joey? I mean, to me,
that's how totalitarian stuff happens, though. You know, this idea where I'm all about free speech, except for you, you know, and it's like, no, we cannot be selective like that. And going back to Benjamin Boyce, when he did this horrible thing to me, horrible on Twitter, he thought he was being cute. And he could throw out these words that were like bad words about women. And he used things like, so he just spelled them out, you know, trollop, prostitute, hooker. He used all of these words that were just like, what? It was just like out of the blue for a lot of women. I was not shocked by it. It was out of the blue. And these women, a lot of them, you know, which Benjamin later said, you know, these rad femmes, they're like the worst. You know, they came and they were challenging him and just like, what the hell are you doing? You know, what are you saying all this? And then Megan Murphy, Allah, the savior feminist, comes along. I always say I have a soft spot for her, but this was crazy. She comes along, you know, he has a right to free speech.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, and then the fighting went like this. And now what happens? And the men love this. Now the women are fighting women.
Yep.
And there's where the battle goes, right? Meanwhile, Benjamin gets to kind of, you know, everything's cool.
Yeah.
And what I was saying about that is if I seen Benjamin get booted off of Twitter for saying the same things or whatever, you know, that we have, or even like I say, Joe Rogan or anybody else, that if there was something, whether it was a stream of vitriol like Trump was doing or whatever, my attitude is the same as you. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to start this channel, is instead of talking about all the noise that's out there, I gave a challenge to an audience on one of the videos I did recently with somebody and said, if half of the women here watching this now or later start their own YouTube channels, because I don't know how long this one will last. It could be off for the next, 24 hours.
Yes.
We fight by making our voices louder.
Yes.
And that's what.
And having lots of different kinds of voices.
Yep.
Because my voice is different than your voices, and different than Alex Aaron's voice, and different than Karen Davis's voice, and even different than Benjamin Boyce's voice. But all of these voices are attempting to clarify how dangerous
don't put Benjamin in there. He said from the jump, I'm not gender critical. It's just that he's platformed and he's built his channel on using this as part of the issue, but he's given voice to excellence. He's given voice to Karen Davis. I mean, so whether or not, his particular voice, he's got a platform. That's a platform.
I don't want to see it shut down. Yeah. And so, and we all have our different, I mean, you and I are very different. We've talked about our styles being very different. How, I'm the one who's sort of like, could we look at this?
And I'm like, you need to see this right now. And you need to do something about it. Like right now.
Honestly, I am so thankful. I mean, Karen says things I would never say. And sometimes I don't always agree with her. I don't 100% agree with her, but I'm thankful for her willingness to get in there and dig at something and to question. I mean, it's really important for us to question why an organization that claims to be against transing kids is supporting AGPs and pedophile apologists and AGP apologists. That is a very important question to be asking.
And platforms at this point, we've got white gay men like Angus joining in with women who want to be men. We've got trans identified females. Most of them are white as well.
Yeah.
What in the hell is going on here? Why do we have this? But, and yet also an organization, not just them, but if you're going to have role modeling, and that's your idea of having somebody like an Erin Kimberly on your staff, as part of your advisory and all this crap, how come you don't have any really prominent gay men who desisted? How
Right.
come you don't have any prominent, listen, I don't want the job, a prominent older lesbian or even younger lesbian who started but stopped as a desister, who also has, the thing about age is that that some of the best spokespeople have to have gone through some sort of awful experience, but not be in the midst of it. They have to have some time away so that they can really think about it and then articulate it well. And then a lot of people have to go through speaking, how do you speak to the public and things like that. And what we have are a lot of people that are in the midst of, or they just stopped taking hormones, or they decided after they did this horrible operation, and they're just minutes away from that. And they're like, oh, can we have you let's put you in here.
And that's a vulnerable person who, in my estimation, is kind of being taken advantage of.
Agree.
And I find that problematic. And I think what you were getting at with that whole concept of
the cult of personality, or
cult
anything?
of personality is important. These are questions that are reasonable questions to be asking. It doesn't mean that we want to destroy an organization. And the other thing is it's okay for an organization to come out and say, we need to change. We made a mistake. We shouldn't have had so-and-so on our board, or we have so-and-so on the board for this reason, and spell it out. Address those concerns. And again, that always, whenever somebody is squishing, saying, no, you cannot answer that. No, you're not allowed. No, you're attacking. It's that Darvo. Somebody taught me that term a while ago, and I just see it over and over. And I probably can't remember what Darvo stands for, but the idea is
I can't right now, and I used to.
Yeah, it's this thing. So when somebody starts, so if I were like, hey, Joey, how come you, I can't come up with an example. I'm sorry.
I don't know where you were going with that, but I think it's about a contradiction. Is that what you're talking about?
It's when, the example that I think of is you have an abusive husband, and the woman goes to the abusive husband and says, please stop abusing me. And the husband's like, abusing you? Yeah. Abusing you? You're the one abusing me. What are you talking about? I have to put up with you.
Turn it around. Totally turned it around.
Yeah, they turn it around. And that's why I couldn't think of an example with you, because you've never done anything even remotely like that. So
I'll make sure in the description I'll put the definition of Darvo.
That.
But that thing of cult of personality is that it can only exist, and if you're in any organization or coalition or whatever, and you see that the person that is really the spokesperson for this group, no matter how large it is or how small it is, and you see a pattern where people can't ask, and they literally are afraid. When this thing came up last year around this woman, and there were two very prominent women also that were involved around this whole thing. And when I would ask women, why don't you come out with your name? I don't understand. Everybody knows at this point, she's got the money and this and that. And I said, are you afraid of being physically hurt? I mean, oh, no. Again, it was always that. Are you afraid of being doxxed? Yes, that was always an easy one. And the next thing was just, I don't want people to think that I'm that way. And it's like, that way, what? Truthful? Because what frightens me about all of this, Erin, again, and I go back to, we're both older in this way, is that this is something that you said in your clip. And I hate it when people just overuse World War II, the Nazi regime, what happened with Hitler, all of this. But I think it's perfect, because this is, it was such a large group of people, many of whom you and I respect, directly work with, that now I've found out were in that Slack group, and yet
they didn't say anything. That's the most disturbing.
Well, we don't know who said and who didn't.
We don't know but
we know the few
there are reports of
that
this
went
group
out,
being
but not all of them.
300 and 500. And I've had one person share something pretty nasty that was said about me.
Yeah.
And then this thing about, and I'm thinking, I know a lot of the people, I'm sure, or they know me, and yet they're quiet.
So what would
And it's
get
probably
this to
because
talk?
they're like, they're just hoping it'll go away. We just won't pay attention to it. We won't say anything. And part of me, I understand that. I mean, it's hard to jump into a fight and defend somebody. It's you know, a lot of these people probably are just trying to, you know, get through the next day. But the fact that people are scared, well, if they find out it was me that shared it, and that was the big concern. If somebody finds out it was me that shared it, what's going to happen?
Right.
We're living in a culture, and this isn't just having to do with the transgender ideology. This is just in general, that we're in a culture where people are so afraid to speak truth. And there's
it could be at a school. We could be talking about a PTA where a parent is there trying to deal with stuff and they get yelled at and screamed down, and then they just shut down. And if they realize that they say anything else, their house is going to be trashed, or their husband or wife will lose the job, or, you know, something will go on, or their kids will be, you know.
And it's true. And that's the problem, is that it's true. I mean, I will never work in academia again, unless the tide changes radically, or unless I go work for an organization that, you know, understands this. But, you know, Utah State University is not going to be on the table for me at all. And, you know, there are relatives that I have who, you know, I probably will never have a good relationship with them again. I've lost almost all of my friends, local friends, because of this, because I'm standing up on this.
I remember your Facebook page and seeing something on there, and I contacted you and said, can I say something on here? And you said, yeah, you know, and I don't know. And I was like, you were letting this woman, in my estimation, just trash you right on your page. I would have just, you know, I would have gone and blocked her, right? And leave that thing there. But the thing is that all of us have lost. I've been a house painter, a colorist and a house painter in my main profession. I've, in the past 6 months, I think it's been now to 7 months, I've lost 2 jobs that I know of. Being I work independently in people's homes and for businesses. I've lost 2 jobs because of, as we say, turfing.
Yeah.
Why? Because of teenage girls who live in the home who started yelling at their mothers for hiring me, or don't hire her, is the most recent thing. Because I've got a virulent trans activist who lives and works and teaches in Berkeley, that I can't say 100%, and I'm not going to say his name.
Right.
Apparently now I learned that part of his classes, he's teaching his students that there's a local turf.
Right.
Names me.
Yeah.
That affects my income. That affects my survival.
Yeah.
All of it.
And it affects I mean, I don't know. Your community is a little bit bigger. I live in a small town.
Yeah.
And I have been threatened. It's possible someone's going to beat me up. It's possible somebody will shoot me. It's possible somebody will, you know, I mean, I live with this knowledge all the time. And so the fear is real. The concern is real. But at the same time, if this isn't enough to get you motivated to fight back, what will? And will it be too late? And that's what I think happened in Nazi Germany and lots of other cases where people just thought, I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm just going to do my own thing, protect my family, protect my job, and it will blow over. Well, this isn't blowing over, and it's not going to blow over. And we have to stand up, and we have to protect our daughters. We have to protect our children. We have to protect our mothers and our grandmothers and our aunts and our sisters. If we don't, where is this society going to be in 5 or 10 years?
And Erin, you are a very brave woman. Didn't you go and do something recently in Ohio, or talk about the? Can you tell us a little bit about that? What did you just do?
So Ohio is introducing legislation to stop transing kids. And I was asked by the sponsor of the legislation to do an introduction for the legislation. And it's interesting because inevitably somebody will say something like, well, you're not a true trans. So how dare you? How do you know? And I always say that's exactly the point, is that I was a kid who was insistent, persistent, consistent, that I was a boy. I would have taken puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and had my breast cut off. And thank goodness I didn't have that option. And that's the point, because none of these kids should have that option. But it's intense. Speaking out like that, it tends to take me, 3 or 4 days to kind of recover, because I just go in and I, bare my soul. But recently, when I've started to speak in public like that, I say, I'm not just speaking for myself. I'm speaking for the thousands who cannot speak. I'm speaking for all those parents who, if they stand up and speak out publicly, they might lose their child because somebody will call protective services on them for not affirming their child, or that mother that will lose her only source of income. And so I understand, I mean, it's that balance of how do we get the people who can stand up to do it? And how do we give voice to the people who can't? And that's where the Pit Substack was phenomenal at giving voice to those who needed to remain anonymous.
And still is. I mean, it's still active. We want to make it sound like it's not happening
No,
anymore.
I think that was an anomaly. I mean, I really feel like, in my mind, when I look at that, it really feels like somebody called up Pit and said, hey, I'm not happy with the heat I'm getting. I want you to put an end to it. It's sort of like this mafioso thing. That's what I have in my mind. I could be completely wrong, but that's what it seems like.
Well, somebody's still moderating the Pit page that decided to do such a, an alarming bold red letters,
Yeah, 100 years.
You were banned from commenting for until 100 years.
Yeah, that's
so personal. It's personal. And then
personal.
that they can't separate.
Yeah.
They cannot separate their own thing from the larger picture. But this thing that you did in Ohio, so how are you feeling about that, about the bill and everything at this point?
Pretty optimistic. The sponsor of the bill is a pastor, and he's a conservative, but he's specifically reaching out to people on both sides of the aisle so that people need to understand that this is not a anti-LGB legislation, that this is completely different, and I respect that he's trying to show that this is about protecting children. This is very much like the kind of legislation that we have that protects them from getting tattoos or drinking alcohol or accessing they can't rent a car, those kinds of things. That's the kind of legislation it is. I'm optimistic about it. I was really disappointed in Utah. We've had rumor has it that there's somebody who's in the higher up of the Utah Jazz that is effectively suppressing any attempts to
Utah Jazz.
That's the professional basketball association.
Oh, okay.
Team
Never
here.
heard of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And rumor has it somebody within that organization is undermining our efforts here. Today, actually right about now, there's a legislative hearing in Alabama about this kind of, and some wonderful people testifying. Sydney Wright, who is a young lesbian, young lesbian who says that, a big part of her wanting to transition was internalized homophobia, is going to be testifying. I believe Patrick Lappert, who's a reconstructive surgeon, who will clearly say that part of a surgeon's training is to identify if somebody has body dysmorphia, and if they do, that they should get psychiatric care. And so this, the transgender kinds of surgeries are completely antithetical to that. So I think that we're making some headway, but I feel like a lot of these are Band-Aids on a gushing wound.
Yeah.
So it's much bigger than just, these little efforts. This is again, and that's one of the reasons why I try to be very aware of my language now, so that when I refer to a woman who's claiming a trans identity, that I consistently call her, even if she looks masculinized, that I consistently call a male who's presenting as feminine, a male, even though he's feminized, that, it's really important. And I've believed this since I was young, that we should not have to adhere to regressive sex-based stereotypes. And that's ultimately what this, this ideology is really reinforcing those in a very ugly way. But I think that it's important to keep having these discussions, and I want people to challenge me in the way I'm thinking. If I've got something, like we had that little exchange about Benjamin Boyce, and I said I probably wouldn't have, and then as you started talking, I'm like, yeah, you're right, I probably should. It doesn't matter who it is. If there's an attempt to silence somebody, we need to stand up against that. So I'm glad that you feel comfortable challenging me, and we should we should all have that kind of relationship where, if somebody says something, rather than just automatically putting hackles up and saying, you're hateful, you're a bigot, to listen and to try and, hear what they're saying, especially in this movement. We come from, you and Jennifer talked about, there's Christian conservatives, there's radical feminists, and there's everything in between that are all fighting against this. And we're not going to agree on everything, but we do agree on this. And this is a battle that's worth fighting together, even if we disagree on everything else.
Now, that's why you've created this organization. You tell me just a couple
sentences. Advocates Protecting Children. Yeah, Advocates Protecting Children.
What are you doing with that?
That is an organization where we're doing outreach to schools, policymakers, and churches. And so we're trying to really just do educational efforts. It's become very apparent as I've traveled and I've spoken to people that most people have no idea what's going on. They don't have a clue. So they think a kid is transing. They think, oh, isn't it cute? That little girl got a haircut and is wearing plaid shirt. And they don't understand that she might have a binder on that's restricting her breathing and potentially damaging her tissue, or that she's got a packer in her panties that's sexualizing her. And so most people just really don't understand that is my goal, is to just reach as many people as possible who have no clue what's going on and explain it to them, because I think too many people are like me in that they just want to be nice. And that's where, for a lot of years, I just wanted to be nice. I would just, go along with the AGP stuff. I even wrote a letter to the editor at one point about, bathroom bills. And I was like, I know what it's like to be uncomfortable in bathrooms. I don't want other people to be uncomfortable in bathrooms. Now I want to just, Erin. And but I think because most of the people in this movement are women, and most women have been taught that we need to be kind and gentle and polite. And I think that goes back to Karen, and why people are, a lot of the response to her is you're not being ladylike. How offensive. And it's coming from the very people who should know better.
Yeah, no, you got it. Well, I'll put all the links and everything in here. You can be found, I know, on social media. Advocates Protecting Children is on Getter, and you're also on Twitter, right?
Yep, and Facebook. So
there we go. All of these pages and everything. Erin, thank you so much for your time, and go get them in Utah.
All right, thanks, Joe.
Go for it. Okay.
Bye-bye.